The studio lights of The View burned bright that morning, casting a polished glow across the set as the audience buzzed with anticipation. Cameras adjusted, makeup artists rushed off stage, and producers whispered through headsets, preparing for what was promoted as a light celebrity interview. Cameron Diaz, one of Hollywood's most recognizable stars, had arrived smiling, dressed in a simple but elegant cream blazer, her hair falling naturally over her shoulders. She greeted the hosts warmly, exchanging hugs and laughter before the cameras went live. At first, everything felt easy, almost effortless. The conversation opened with familiar ground, her career, her time away from Hollywood, and her reflections on fame. Cameron leaned back in her chair, relaxed, speaking with her usual calm charm. The audience laughed when she joked about how strange it felt to see herself in old movie clips, and even the hosts seemed pleased with how smooth the segment was going. But something subtle shifted when the topic turned toward her long break from acting. One of the hosts leaned forward, smiling but probing, asking if she felt she had abandoned Hollywood at the peak of her success. The question landed, heavier than expected. Cameron's smile didn't disappear, but it tightened slightly. She paused a fraction longer before answering, choosing her words carefully, explaining that she had simply needed space, peace, and time to live a life outside constant public attention. The audience nodded, but the line of questioning didn't ease up. Another host chimed in, suggesting that many fans felt disappointed by her absence and asking whether she regretted stepping away. The atmosphere grew subtly tense. Cameron's posture shifted. She straightened in her chair, her hands resting more firmly on her knees. She responded politely at first, saying she understood fans' feelings, but emphasized that personal well-being had to come first. Then came the moment that changed everything. A follow-up question was asked about whether she felt pressure from Hollywood executives who might have lost faith in her return. The phrasing was sharp, almost confrontational, and the studio seemed to hold its breath for a split second. Cameron looked down briefly, then back up at the host. Her expression was no longer relaxed. It was focused, intense, and visibly emotional. She began to speak slowly, her voice steady but firm. She said that people often misunderstood what it meant to step away from fame. It wasn't rejection of fans or failure in career. It was survival, clarity, and self-respect. As she spoke, her tone grew stronger, her hands beginning to gesture more actively. The calm celebrity facade started to fade, replaced by something more raw and unfiltered. The hosts tried to steer the conversation back to lighter territory, but Cameron continued, her voice rising slightly. She explained how exhausting it was to constantly justify personal choices to the public, how women in Hollywood were often judged more harshly for choosing life over visibility. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing the energy in the room changing rapidly. Then, in a moment that stunned everyone present, Cameron leaned forward and addressed the tone of the interview directly. She said that it was one thing to ask questions, but another to frame personal decisions as failures or disappointments. Her words carried weight, and the studio fell into a near silence except for the faint hum of cameras. One of the hosts attempted to interrupt with a soft laugh, trying to lighten the mood, but Cameron raised her hand slightly, not aggressively, but firmly, indicating she wasn't finished. She continued speaking, her voice now emotional but controlled, explaining how often celebrities are reduced to narratives that ignore their humanity. At this point, the energy on set was completely different from the cheerful start. The audience was no longer laughing or clapping. Even the hosts had shifted into attentive silence, realizing the conversation had gone far beyond typical daytime TV exchange. Cameron's voice cracked briefly as she spoke about the pressure she had faced during her most successful years, describing how she often felt like she was living for everyone else's expectations instead of her own happiness. She admitted that stepping away had been one of the hardest, but most necessary decisions of her life. There was a pause after her words. A long, heavy silence filled the studio. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, it was reflective, as if everyone present had been forced to reconsider the assumptions behind their earlier questions. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of escalating further, Cameron softened. She took a breath, leaned back slightly, and her expression eased. She acknowledged that she didn't blame anyone personally on the set. saying she understood that interviews often push for dramatic narratives. But she also gently reminded them that behind every headline was a real person, making real choices. The tone shifted again, this time toward reconciliation. One of the hosts nodded thoughtfully and thanked her for being honest. Another admitted that the question may have been worded too strongly. The audience responded with quiet applause, slowly building as the tension dissolved. By the end of the segment, the energy had transformed completely. What began as a light celebrity interview had become an intense, emotional exchange about fame, identity, and personal freedom. Cameron smiled again, but this time it was different, more grounded, more real. She thanked the hosts for having her and expressed hope that conversations like this could help people understand celebrities beyond the surface. As the cameras stopped rolling, the studio exhaled collectively. Producers rushed in, some looking shaken, others impressed. The hosts gathered themselves, exchanging glances that said more than words ever could. And Cameron, still composed, stood up, shook hands, and quietly left the stage. What remained behind wasn't chaos, but reflection, a reminder that even under the brightest studio lights, truth has a way of breaking through, unplanned and unforgettable.